Someone younger than me, someone less than half my age, asked me about Charles Manson. I did recognize the name. I said yes. He filled in the main points of the story, and I said, "That's right." And I said no more. I belong to the baby boom generation, that huge spike in the American population following the soldiers' return after the Second World War. We were probably coddled, and we thought we were something special. In hindsight, it's embarrassing to recall it, and painful to think about it. It might have been the greatest public concentration of naivete in history. We were going to improve things, make the world a better place, correct the glaring errors of previous generations, especially our parents, who were fundamentally good people, but they just didn't get it, not like we did. See what I mean about painful? It gets worse. There was the whole Age of Aquarius bit and the hippies with their gospel of peace, love, music, and drugs. Surely you can see the profound and obvious wisdom in that. So, on the way to making the world a better place, the first priority would be to end the war in Vietnam and to bring true harmony between the races, black and white. And there was some deliberate action directed towards those goals, along with the sex, drugs, and music. All of that hit a peak in 1967, which was called the Summer of Love. If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair. Oh boy. You could not call 1968 a smooth transition of progress. Well, changing the world, no one said it would be easy. But Martin Luther King Jr. was shot to death, and then Robert Kennedy was shot to death, and those were two big hits, like nails in the coffin of my generation. What we had hoped for, believed in, and most of all, expected, because we were spoiled, most of what we wanted was given to us, and we thought we were deserving, and besides that, here we were right. The war was bad, and black people were people. They should be treated like people. Skin color did not matter. Who was going to argue with that? But it wasn't going to be that simple, not with all the things that were happening. It was hard to stay on point with that basic message. So all the other things, the great things we would do beyond ending the war and racial equality, they began to evaporate and drift away. Which brings us to 1969 and Charles Manson. His mother was 16 when he was born. She never wanted anything to do with him. His father was long gone. He picked up the name Manson from a stepfather who was soon also long gone. He lived with relatives in other places, then state institutions, and he'd run away, go to his mother who didn't want him, back in some halfway house, run away, stealing to eat, started going to prison, and by the time he was 32, he'd been in prison half his life. Released on probation, he took a look around. He'd learned to play the guitar, called himself a singer-songwriter. He went to San Francisco, cut himself a share of the available sex and drugs, and as for the music, he was hanging out with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. They listened to the Beatles' White Album, which had also just been released. Manson was transported. He said he was going to be bigger than the Beach Boys, bigger than the Beatles. He collected a string of people, a little commune, mostly young women, an outcast at the head of a bunch of dropouts, and they called themselves a family, the Manson family. Hearing that chills me now. They lived in various outlying places, traveled in a retooled bus like the Merry Pranksters, and kept doing their share of the peace, love, music, and drugs, with Charlie playing the LSD-powered Svengali. But it wasn't happening for Charlie Manson, not like it should have. He wasn't living that rags-to-riches story so close to the American bone. Never having been loved, he couldn't give it, find it, couldn't trust it. "I would die for you," he'd tell his family. "Would you die for me?" Didn't he deserve love? Everyone else had it. He was bitter about that, and bitter over his failed ambition to be a famous musician. The bitterness became unbearable, became a rage. If he couldn't have the things he wanted, why should others? He believed a race war was imminent. He called it helter-skelter, and he thought he could set it off with a series of brutal slayings, lay low while it burned, then step in and take over. That was the prosecutor's novelistic version. Manson's was more practical. There was a guy he knew in prison for murder. Manson figured if there were more murders with the same M.O., the cops would have to release him. Either way, you put peace, love, music, and drugs into a pot, and what do you get? Turns out, it depends. With Charlie Manson calling the tune, we got the grisly manifesto of the Tate LaBianca murders. If you're going to do something, Manson told Tex Watson, leave something witchy. Tex spelled it out in blood. Arrests were made, and there, emerging from his bitter nowhere, was Charlie Manson, a little guy with fiendish eyes who carved a swastika on his forehead and bounced around looking like Rasputin, the mad monk. Charlie and his family, and what they had done. Charlie said, I didn't kill anybody. How many nails do you need to shut a coffin? Charlie gave us 5 or 6 or 7. If you had any vestige remaining of the objectives that had percolated up in a generation, by 1969, the last trace of that was eradicated. It was over. We made it to the moon. I say we, but it wasn't my generation. We were bystanders. Typically, we watched it happen on television, but down on Earth, the big blue marble, we knew way deep, bone-chilling down now that things were not going to improve. We weren't going to do anything of that sort. In fact, thanks to Charlie Manson, we could see that they might get a whole lot worse, not in spite of us, but because of us. The road to hell was paved not merely with good intentions, but more specifically with peace, love, music, and drugs.